Hi, I'm Avery. For 10 years, I raised my sister's kids, paid the bills, bought the house, and kept the lights on. Then a fire took it all. When I showed up at my mother's doorstep that night shaking, freezing, begging for a place to sleep, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "This isn't a shelter." The next morning, I cut every dollar. And by nightfall, my phone had 39 missed calls. Not one of them asked where I slept. Before we begin, have you ever been erased by the very people you held together? Leave a comment. I read every one. I was 27 the day my sister came back home with 2 kids and no plan. It was mid-January in Seattle, gray and wet like always. I had just accepted a new job offer in Portland, something stable, something finally mine. I'd even packed up half my studio apartment. But that morning I got a call from my mom. She sounded calm, like she was announcing the weather. "Sienna's back," she said. "She's got the babies with her. They'll stay a while." A while turned into 2 years. Sienna stood in the kitchen that first night with Sophie swaddled to her chest and Eli barely walking, clutching her jeans. She was 33, but looked older, tired around the eyes, lipstick smudged. She said she just needed a few months to figure things out to land on her feet. She didn't look at me much. When she did, it was with that familiar edge of expectation. "You'll help, right? You always help." And I did. I canceled the Portland move within a week. My would-have-been boss at the finance firm sounded disappointed but not surprised. He said something about family coming first. I told him it was temporary. It wasn't. By spring, I was the one waking up at 3 a.m. to warm bottles, rocking Sophie back to sleep while Sienna slept through on the pullout. I made appointments, filed for preschool slots, memorized Eli's favorite bedtime stories. He liked the one about the bear who couldn't find his blanket. Every time I read it, he looked up at me like I was the only thing holding his world together. Sienna got a job at a furniture boutique for a few weeks, then quit. Said it wasn't the right energy. She started spending nights out again. The kids stayed with me. Mom said it was natural. "You're so good with them, Avery. It suits you." She never asked if I wanted any of it. Dad would give a nod or a quiet grunt whenever he saw me juggling diaper bags and grocery lists. Sometimes he patted my shoulder like I'd done something mildly commendable. Mostly he stayed in the garage. We all fell into a rhythm. I was up at 6, lunches packed, Sophie strapped in the car seat, Eli dressed and clinging to my leg. Sienna slept in, blamed migraines, then took off mid-morning in leggings and oversized sunglasses, always promising she'd be back early. She rarely was. One Sunday, I had tickets to see a friend's jazz quartet. I'd told Sienna 3 times, even wrote it on the fridge calendar. The kids were supposed to stay with her for just 2 hours. When the time came, she was gone. No note, no text. I sat on the couch in my coat, holding my keys, watching the rain streak the window while Eli built a tower with blocks on the rug. I didn't go to the show. When I finally reached her at midnight, she said her phone had died and something came up. Then she laughed like I was being dramatic. "Chill, Av. They're your family too." I started keeping a spreadsheet. Not for money, not yet, just for my own sanity. Doctor visits, grocery runs, school supplies, days off work. I color-coded it. Yellow for errands, red for emergencies. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe proof that I wasn't just imagining the weight of it all. Every time I hinted at burnout, Mom waved it off. "You're single, honey. No husband, no kids of your own. You have space for this." She made it sound like my life was an empty suitcase waiting to be filled with other people's baggage. I didn't argue. I just got up earlier. Drank more coffee. Took Eli to speech therapy and Sophie to daycare orientation. I sat through her first tantrum at Target, forehead burning, while strangers judged me like I was her mother. Sometimes I forgot I wasn't. Sienna started showing up with new clothes, expensive purses. Said they were gifts from someone she was seeing. She smiled, wide eyes too bright, and said things were turning around. But nothing changed at home. The kids were still mine from breakfast to bedtime. One night I was folding laundry in the living room while Sophie napped against my side. Eli sat beside me, drawing swirls in crayon across printer paper. He handed me one, a crooked stick figure with a big smile and long brown hair. "That's you," he said. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing to the smaller figure beside me. "Me," he said. "That's me with you." I stared at the paper longer than I should have. I knew he wouldn't remember these years exactly, not the diapers or the storybooks or the way I rubbed his back when he was scared of the thunder. But something in him had already decided where he felt safest. And it wasn't with his mother. I tucked the drawing into the back of my notebook and didn't tell anyone about it. The day Sienna told us she'd be moving out, she made it sound like an announcement. "I'm finally getting back on my feet," she said over spaghetti. Harper clapped like it was a graduation. Joel raised his glass. Sienna smiled at me just briefly and said, "Thank you for keeping things steady." Then she kissed the kids goodnight and left for the weekend. She didn't take them with her. I put both kids to bed that night and sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the hallway where her suitcase had been. She never came back for it. At first I told myself she just needed time. A few nights to think, maybe space to breathe. But days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The kids stopped asking when she was coming home. They still called her mommy, but they stopped looking for her face in the driveway. I switched to remote contract work, mostly accounting and small business budgeting for local shops in Tacoma. I pieced together invoices during nap times and in the few hours between bedtime and my own exhaustion. The flexibility meant I could pick up Sophie from preschool and attend Eli's reading evaluations without begging anyone to cover for me. By the time Sophie started kindergarten, I had memorized the school nurse's direct line, knew which teachers liked gluten-free cupcakes for birthdays, and exactly how long it took to drive from our place to the urgent care clinic when Eli broke his arm falling from the monkey bars. One day I stood in the parent pickup lane next to the other moms and realized none of them questioned why I was there. They knew me. I had the school's app notifications set on high, paid for lunches in advance, brought extra tissues during flu season. I even chaired the winter fundraiser one year because no one else volunteered. Sienna's name was never on any emergency form. Mine was on all of them. Still, I kept thinking she'd come back. Maybe on a birthday. Maybe when Sophie lost her first tooth, but she didn't even call. Then, out of nowhere 2 years later, she showed up on a Tuesday morning like she had never left. I opened the door and there she was with her hair straightened and a reusable latte cup in one hand. She kissed the kids like nothing had happened and turned to me with that same rehearsed smile. "You've got such a rhythm going," she said. "You're so good with them." I didn't want to interfere. I stood in the doorway for a full minute after she walked in. Interfere, that's what she called it. Harper treated the return like a homecoming. She made a roast that night and poured wine and called it healing. Joel stayed quiet as usual, chewing methodically while Sienna talked about a new job opportunity in Boise and how she might be traveling more. Sophie clung to my leg while she spoke. Eli barely looked up from his plate. After dinner, Harper sat beside me on the porch, her cardigan pulled tight around her. She looked at me the way she always did when she thought she was being gentle. "You've always been the responsible one, Avery. You're different from your sister. You just are." She said it like a compliment, but it landed like a brand. By then I was 30. My friends were getting married, building families, buying homes. I had a spreadsheet of Sophie's asthma meds and a drawer full of construction paper art. I hadn't taken a vacation in 5 years. I hadn't dated in 4. When I finally met someone, his name was Marcus. He worked in community development and liked hiking and quiet jazz on vinyl. He understood schedules and patience and never raised his voice. On our third date, I told him about the kids, about how they weren't mine, but kind of were. He didn't flinch. Over the next 6 months, we met on Thursdays for dinner and slow conversation. He brought over flowers for Sophie's spring concert and helped Eli build a volcano for his school project. One evening, he showed up with takeout and asked if we could talk. He sat across from me, fingers tracing the edge of the styrofoam lid, and asked if I'd ever considered moving in together. "Not tomorrow," he said. "Not even this year, but soon. Maybe start building something just ours." I didn't know how to answer. Later that night, I lay in bed with the baby monitor on and the scent of mac and cheese still lingering in the air. I stared at the ceiling and thought about what it would mean to pack my life into something that didn't include those 2 small bedrooms down the hall. I thought about how Harper would react. about the dentist appointments coming up, about who would remember Sophie's spelling test if I wasn't there. So I told him no. Not because I didn't care, I cared deeply. But I didn't know how to unlace myself from the fabric of their daily lives. I didn't know how to stop being the stand-in mother when no one else had applied for the job. He understood. Too well. A week later, he ended things gently, kindly, and permanently. I didn't tell anyone. Harper was too busy helping Sienna prep for a trade show in Salt Lake. Joel had taken up woodworking and started sanding scraps of pine in the garage. Sienna posted on social media like she'd invented single motherhood. Every photo had her in the frame, arms around smiling kids, while I stood just outside the shot holding diaper bags and snack containers. The kids got older. Eli won a science ribbon. Sophie wrote an essay about the person she admired most and read it aloud to her class. She said my name. Not Sienna's. I kept working, kept folding their laundry, kept taking them to the park and warning them about sunscreen and asking about math quizzes. The routine filled every inch of my life, and no one noticed that I had slowly disappeared inside it. One evening, Harper called while I was meal prepping for the week. She asked about my income. Just wondering if you'll still be able to cover the internet and utilities next month, she said. Sienna's had a tough quarter. I didn't respond right away. She followed it up with her favorite line. You know we're all in this together. I almost laughed. Instead, I sliced carrots until my knuckles cramped. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody asked what I needed. They just assumed I had more to give. And for a while I did. Until I couldn't. By early 2020, I had saved just enough for a down payment on a modest 2-bedroom home in Spokane. It wasn't much, but it was solid, with a small yard and a creaky porch that reminded me of summers at Grandma Gloria's. I had scoured the listings alone, toured properties between Eli's soccer games and Sophie's dentist appointments. When I signed the papers at the closing table, the realtor smiled and said, "Congratulations," like it was a wedding. It felt that way. Like something I built for myself by myself. I brought the kids with me the first time I got the keys. Eli ran through the empty living room pretending it was a racetrack while Sophie opened every cabinet in the kitchen and asked where the cereal would go. I didn't have the heart to tell them it wasn't meant for all of us. Not forever. I thought maybe this house could be a boundary. A line between who I had been and who I wanted to be. A space where I could exhale. It didn't last. Harper walked through the front door with a clipboard and immediately started assigning corners for furniture. She pointed out where the family photo wall should go and which room Sienna could take once she got back on her feet. She referred to it as our home. Not once did she say mine. Joel barely looked up from his phone when I reminded them the house was in my name. He just said "Good for you, sweetheart," and asked if the garage was insulated. By summer, Sienna had moved in. She said she would help out around the house, maybe contribute a little once she landed consistent freelance work. Instead, she repurposed the guest room into her creative space, complete with string lights and a vision board covered in half-finished design mock-ups. I asked about rent once. She said she was working on something big and needed time. Meanwhile, the roof started leaking near the back hallway. The insurance only covered partial repairs, and the contractor said the whole section needed replacement before the next winter storm. I pulled the funds from my savings. Harper watched me write the check and said, "That's what we do. We keep things going." There was no we, it was just me. When I brought up moving into the house myself, Harper raised an eyebrow and asked where the kids would go. I reminded her I had already rented a small studio apartment downtown near the library so I could focus on work. She said a good daughter made space for the family first. And besides, you're the one with a finance degree. Who better to manage the home? The word manage landed like a slap. Like I was a steward of something I didn't own. I returned to the house less and less, only to drop off groceries, school supplies, or when the boiler needed a reset. The rest of the time I lived in my one-room apartment surrounded by budget folders and quiet. One rainy Saturday I stopped by to grab tax documents I had left in the desk drawer of what used to be my room. Sienna wasn't home. The kids were at a birthday party. Harper was folding laundry in the living room while watching a home renovation show. The stack of mail on the kitchen counter caught my eye. It was thick and messy, catalogs and coupons mixed with official-looking envelopes. I sifted through looking for a bank statement. Then I saw it. A renewal notice for the homeowner's insurance. The envelope had been opened. The paperwork inside looked smudged with something oily, like it had been read over coffee. I skimmed the first page, confirming the policy was active. The premium had gone up, but I expected that. Then I flipped to the beneficiary section. My name was there. Sort of. It had been typed in, then crossed out. In pen. Sloppy lines cutting through each letter. Below it, written in a different color ink, was Sienna's name. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. It wasn't a formal change. No official form. No notarization. Just ink over ink, like a teenager forging a permission slip. I walked back into the living room, document in hand. Harper didn't even look up from the television. "What is this?" I asked. She reached for her reading glasses, adjusted them, and then waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that. I told the agent to make the update over the phone. Sienna's here more often. If something happens, it's just easier to handle. You didn't think to ask me." "It's not a big deal," she said. "It's just paperwork. You're still the one paying the premiums, aren't you?" I stood there holding the page like it might catch fire in my fingers. She added without looking at me, "Don't be dramatic, Avery. We're all on the same side." I folded the document carefully and placed it back in the envelope. My hands were shaking. In the car, I sat in the driveway for a long time. The rain blurred the windshield, and I didn't bother wiping it away. I thought about calling Cassandra, but it felt premature. Instead, I just stared at the porch light flickering over the door, the same light I had replaced last year, the same fixture I had paid for. It wasn't about the money. Not anymore. It was about the assumption. The assumption that my work, my name, my ownership could be erased without consequence. That I was only the fine print in everyone else's story. I turned the key in the ignition and drove back to my studio without turning on the radio. The silence was louder than anything I could have played. It was the cold that woke me. Sharp, dry, and wrong. I had fallen asleep on my studio couch, wrapped in 2 blankets, with a spreadsheet open on my laptop and a cold mug of tea on the floor beside me. The sun hadn't come up yet. My phone buzzed against the table screen, glowing in the dark. It was a text from Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly woman who lived across from the house on Rosewood. "Are you okay? It's on the news." I sat up slowly, my heart already tightening. I texted back. "What is her response?" Came instantly. "Your house, fire, early this morning." I didn't even put on socks. I grabbed my keys, coat, and bag and flew down the stairs, breath already clouding in the air. The streets were slick with black ice and the sky still bruised with pre-dawn gray. I drove on, instinct barely seeing the road. When I turned onto Rosewood Drive, the flashing red and blue lights were already gone, but yellow tape still hung in the wind like limp streamers. The house was nothing but a blackened skeleton. The porch had collapsed in on itself, and the roof had caved down through what used to be the living room. Smoke still hung in the air, heavy and acidic. The white siding had melted into streaks of brown and gray. I parked 2 blocks away. The road was barricaded with cones and a half-frozen sawhorse. No one stopped me as I walked closer. The silence was total. A man with a clipboard and a hard hat nodded at me from a distance. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if he knew who I was. I just stood there, hands clenched in my coat pockets, staring at what used to be mine. No one had called me. Not Harper, not Joel, not Sienna, not even the kids. I stood there for 10 minutes. Maybe longer. Then I turned back toward the car. The cold had gotten into my boots and up my sleeves. My body felt brittle. When I got back to my studio, the door was ajar. The hallway floor was wet, puddles stretching out from a leaking pipe above. A fire in the neighboring unit had set off the sprinklers. Again. My carpet was soaked, my mattress damp. Mold already clung to the baseboards. I sat down on the edge of the futon, water squishing beneath me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. There was nowhere to go. So I got back in the car. I drove to Woodhaven, the suburban neighborhood where Harper and Joel lived. It was past midnight now. The roads were icy and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a warning. Their driveway was clean and dry. Christmas lights blinked steadily along the roofline. I sat in the car for a minute staring at the soft glow from the kitchen window, the familiar shapes of furniture inside. Then I climbed out my jeans, stiff with cold. I walked up the stone steps and rang the doorbell once. Harper opened the door in a silk robe, the same one I remembered from every Thanksgiving morning. Her expression didn't change when she saw me. She crossed her arms and tilted her head like she'd been expecting a package, not her oldest daughter dripping water onto the doormat. "I just need a few nights," I said. My voice cracked on the last word. She didn't move. Behind her, I could see Sienna standing near the island, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, holding a glass of red wine. She didn't say anything. Harper let out a long, tight breath. "This isn't a shelter, Avery." It took me a second to understand. "Just until I can find another apartment," I said. "Just until I figure it out." Harper shook her head slowly. "Ask one of those charities you're always donating to, or one of the cousins whose tuition you covered. Use that big heart of yours on yourself for once." I blinked. Camille didn't move. She just shifted her weight like she was watching a movie she'd already seen. I didn't beg. I turned back into the night, the cold hitting me like a wall. I got into my car and sat there with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield. No one followed. No one called. 2 weeks earlier, I had transferred over $1,200 to Sienna for an emergency vet bill. I had brought groceries to Harper and Joel every Thanksgiving. I had paid for Joel's blood pressure meds for the last 2 years without a single word. I sat in that driveway for 10 minutes before pulling away. By the time I hit Route 18, my thoughts had hardened. They weren't thoughts anymore. They were facts rearranged like bricks. They didn't just forget me, they had erased me. At a budget motel just outside Tacoma, I handed over my ID and credit card. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions. He handed me a plastic keycard and gestured to the stairs. The room smelled like bleach and lemon cleaner, like someone had tried very hard to erase something but failed. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My phone sat beside me, dark and silent. Nobody had called me. But I already knew why. They only saw me when something needed to be paid. Around 3 in the morning, I sat up on the edge of the motel bed, legs numb, my fingers tingling from cold and something sharper. I opened my laptop, the one I'd carried in that tote bag for years, the one with keys faded from overuse. I connected to the motel Wi-Fi, one flickering bar of signal in the upper right corner. That was all I needed. I opened the spreadsheet. I hadn't looked at it in months. But every tab, every cell, every dollar was still there, color-coded and dated. Tuition for Sophie's private kindergarten, $8,600. Orthodontics down payment for Eli, $2,000. Blood pressure meds for Joel 3 times a year, $320 per refill. Back deck repair after the storm in 2019, $2,200. The GoFundMe donation I made under a fake name because Sienna was embarrassed she hadn't raised enough, $1,000. The emergency vet bill when Sienna's dog swallowed a bottle cap, $1,200, paid via instant transfer. Monthly grocery drop-offs for Harper and Joel every first Sunday, averaging $300 per trip, 74 months in a row. The cell phone family plan started when Sophie needed a smartwatch for safety, $175 a month, still running. Gas gift cards mailed to Joel so he could visit the kids more often, usually 50 each, 23 total. Every dollar logged. Every justification next to it. Notes in the margin. Times, dates, receipts scanned and hyperlinked. It was the only place I had ever told the truth. The final number sat in the bottom right cell, highlighted in pale green. $176,418. I stared at it until the numbers blurred, then steadied again. And not once. Not one time. Had anyone ever said thank you? I took a deep breath, clicked open my banking app, and started the real work. One by one, I canceled the automatic transfers. I paused payments on the shared utilities, deleted the recurring donation Harper had set up using my account credentials, and called the family phone plan provider to remove every line except my own. I answered the security questions like muscle memory. They didn't ask why I wanted to close it all, they just complied. I moved to PayPal, then Zelle, then Chase. I found a recurring deposit labeled Household Harper and deleted it without blinking. I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching the rows disappear. It didn't feel like revenge, it felt like shedding skin. Like finally peeling off a mask I hadn't realized I'd been wearing for years. At 4:30, I shut the laptop and climbed back into bed. The mattress springs creaked under me. The sheets smelled like lemon disinfectant and something older beneath it. I fell asleep without a blanket, but I didn't feel cold. The morning light crept in through the edge of the curtains. And then my phone exploded. It started with a low vibration against the nightstand, then again. I blinked, reached for it, and saw the number. 39 missed calls. I hadn't gotten that many calls total in the past 6 months. 18 from Harper. 11 from Sienna. 7 from Joel. 3 from a cousin I hadn't spoken to since a baby shower 4 years ago. I let the screen flash in silence. The first message preview slid across the top. Harper, call me. Why is my card not working? The next came in less than a minute later. Sienna. Did you cut off Sophie's tuition that's due today, Avery? Then another. Harper. Your father is trying to refill his meds and it's not going through. None of them asked if I was okay. None of them asked where I had slept. None asked if I was safe. Just panic. Just money. I turned the phone face down and let it buzz against the thin motel blanket. I walked to the sink, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red and my hair was pulled into a messy knot, but my face looked calm. There was something solid in it. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. I pulled on jeans, my navy blazer, and the boots I had shoved in the car weeks ago. Then I picked up my bag and left. I didn't check the messages again. I already knew what they were going to say. By 9 the next morning, I was standing in line at the Spokane County Records office with a copy of the homeowner's insurance in my bag and a knot in my stomach. The building smelled like old carpet and fluorescent lights. A man in front of me was arguing about a zoning permit. I barely heard him. My palms were sweaty against the plastic sleeve that held the documents. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the glass window and greeted the clerk. Her name tag said Deborah. She looked to be in her 60s, silver hair pulled into a clip, sharp eyes that had seen everything twice. Hi, I said, trying to sound calm. I'm looking for a copy of the amended insurance filing for a fire claim on Rosewood Drive. It was filed just after the holidays. I believe my name should be on it. She tilted her head and held out her hand. Do you have identification and documentation? I passed both through the slot. She flipped through the file, frowning slightly. After a moment, she stood and disappeared into a back room without a word. I waited. My heart thudded against my ribs like a warning drum. 10 minutes later, she returned holding a thin stapled packet and a crease between her eyebrows. There was an amendment filed, she said, glancing down. 3 weeks before the fire. The beneficiary was changed to a Sienna Monroe. She paused. You're not listed anywhere on the final version. I felt the floor shift beneath me. Was there a formal request? Any legal authorization, power of attorney? She shook her head. It looks handwritten. Not standard protocol, but the underwriter approved it. Probably didn't flag the signature. Happens more than it should. I nodded once. That's all I needed to know. Thank you. I walked outside without speaking. The sky was overcast and low, and the air had that thin, sharp edge of December cold. I didn't put on my gloves. I needed to feel something in my hands. On the way back to the motel, I passed the public library and turned in without planning to. The warmth inside hit me like a wall. I hadn't realized how cold I was until I stepped into it. I moved toward the nearest available computer and logged in. There was something I needed to see. I opened the browser and typed in the name of the neighborhood's GoFundMe page. I had helped set it up years ago when a neighbor's son got injured in a motorcycle accident. I still remembered the URL. The top post was pinned. Help Harper rebuild after house fire. I clicked. A photo filled the screen. Harper, Sienna, Eli, and Sophie stood in front of the scorched remains of the house. Harper had one arm around Sienna, the other resting protectively on Sophie's shoulder. Everyone looked somber. Behind them, the charred bones of the roof framed the sky like a monument to tragedy. I wasn't in the picture, I scrolled. The description read like a dramatic monologue. On the morning of December 22nd, our family lost everything in a devastating house fire. My daughter Sienna and I have been raising my two beautiful grandchildren, Eli and Sophie, with love and resilience. We're grateful to be alive, but heartbroken to lose the home that meant everything to us. The home I bought. At the bottom of the post was a video link. I clicked. It opened to Harper sitting on a bench bundled in a thick coat, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. We built that house with memories, she said softly. Every holiday, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. It was more than walls. It was family. She paused for effect. Now we're starting from scratch, we're doing our best. But we've lost everything. Her voice cracked. Please help us rebuild our home. I stared at the screen, frozen. The views counter ticked upward while I sat there. 4,000. 6,000. 9. The comment section was full of strangers. Sending prayers, stay strong. Donated. Not one word about me. No mention of who paid the property taxes for 3 straight years. No note about whose name was on the deed. No thank you to the person who had kept the lights on, the water flowing, the pantry stocked. They had rewritten the story. I wasn't the eldest daughter who gave up 10 years. I wasn't the owner of the house. I wasn't even the sister who had raised those kids like they were her own. I was gone. Deleted. I sat there staring at Harper's face on the screen, the same expression she used at church potlucks when she wanted someone to hand her the last slice of lemon pie. My hands clenched in my lap. They hadn't just survived without me. They had made sure I didn't exist. The wind scraped at my coat as I walked back to the car. I didn't rush. Letting my boots drag across the gravel felt more honest than pretending I still had somewhere to be. No one had asked where I was staying. No one had asked how I was sleeping. The only thing anyone wanted to know was why their cards had stopped working. The silence in the car hit like a familiar ache. I started the engine but didn't drive. I just sat there with both hands on the wheel and stared out at nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I felt removed, like I had floated outside my own body and was watching someone else unravel. That house was never mine, they would say. But I remembered paying the first property tax bill. I remembered choosing the light fixtures for the hallway and matching the cabinet colors to Sophie's drawings. I remembered staying up past midnight to scrub mildew off the bathroom tiles before a CPS inspection when someone at school called in a report. No one else had scrubbed, no one else had stayed. And now I was the missing character in their story. A ghost edited out of the family album. I found myself pulling into Rosewood again just past 7. The sky had gone soft with dusk. A few neighbors still had their porch lights on, but the street felt empty. I parked across from the lot where the house had once stood. The yellow tape had blown loose in the wind. Part of it was tangled in the bushes. I stepped through the ruins slowly. The ground was uneven, blackened. I didn't step over anything, I stepped into it. The mess. The soot. The space where I had poured my best years. Near what used to be the pantry, I saw a glint of metal under a half-burned sheet of plywood. I bent down and pushed it aside. It was a picture frame, cracked, the back melted at one edge. Inside, the photo had burned around the borders, curling in at the corners, but the image remained. Me and Sophie in the old kitchen. She must have been 3 or 4. Her hair in pigtails smudged with chocolate, arms around my neck. I was laughing. Someone had caught us mid-motion, blurry but unmistakable. I stared at it for a long time. They didn't even take this with them. I wiped the glass with my sleeve and tucked it gently into my coat. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried everything no one else wanted to admit. I left the ruins without looking back. At the motel, I sat on the edge of the bed and placed the photo on the nightstand. Then I lay back and stared at the ceiling until the blinking smoke detector light was the only thing I could focus on. Around 9, my email dinged. A message from Jared, my cousin on Harper's side. We hadn't talked since Joel's retirement party 2 years ago. Subject: just letting you know, hey, I know it's probably not my place, but Harper's not doing well. She's not eating, barely sleeping, and Sophie's been asking for you. Like a lot. I think she's confused. She keeps saying you'll come back when she finishes her chores. Just wanted you to know. Jared. I stared at the email without blinking. Not angry. Just hollow. It wasn't the part about Harper that stuck. It was Sophie's belief that finishing her chores would make me return like I was a bedtime story or a reward for good behavior. I closed the laptop. I didn't reply. At midnight the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered, the voice on the other end brought me back a decade. Avery, hey. It's Cassandra Bell. My breath caught. Cassandra. We hadn't spoken in years. She'd been my best friend in undergrad. I had helped cover her last semester's tuition when her father lost his job and their financial aid collapsed. She promised she'd pay it forward someday. I heard what happened, she said. Not from Harper. I saw the GoFundMe. Of course she had. I waited. I know this is messy, she continued. I won't pretend I understand all of it, but I'm reaching out because I can help. I'm a partner now at Morrison & Keene. I specialize in asset recovery and family fraud. She paused. You want to shut the book on this? I sat in silence. The photo of Sophie and me caught the motel lamplight. I stared at it. Cassandra's voice softened. You want to make sure they never do this to you again. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. Yes, I said. Then let's get to work. The knock came just after 8. Firm, sharp, no pause. Not the kind of knock you ignore. I opened the motel door slowly, expecting another staff member or a delivery mix-up. But Harper stood there wrapped in a long coat scarf tied neatly around her neck, eyes blazing beneath a layer of mascara. The hallway light flickered behind her, casting long shadows against the stained wallpaper. She didn't wait for an invitation. She brushed past me, heels clicking against the thin carpet like punctuation. You've created a mess. Avery, she said, turning to face me in the center of the room like she was delivering a sermon. I can't go to the grocery store without someone whispering. People are saying I exploited you. That you were the one paying for everything. Do you know how that looks? I closed the door quietly. She never asked how I was. Never even glanced at the room, the bed with the thin blanket, the cracked mirror, the heater that hummed too loud. I leaned against the dresser. I stopped paying bills, that's all. If that makes me the villain, maybe people were never looking closely. Harper's lips tightened. She set her purse down like it was a burden. You didn't have to make it public, she snapped. That email, the freeze on the accounts. Sophie's tuition bounced this week. I didn't make it public, I said. You did. You stood in front of the ashes of my house and told people it was yours. You raised money with my absence. She waved a hand. That was for survival. You don't understand what it's like to hold everything together. I laughed. A short, humorless breath. I held your everything together for 10 years, Mom. I cooked. I paid. I raised 2 kids that weren't mine while you called it responsibility. And not once did you ask if I was tired, or lonely, or afraid. Her shoulders stiffened. I thought you were stronger than this, she said, voice colder now. We didn't think you'd walk away so completely. You didn't think I'd stop accepting crumbs, I corrected. But here I am. Harper picked up her purse like she was closing a deal. You've changed. I finally stopped apologizing for not being who you wanted. She stared at me for a moment longer, then turned and left without another word. The door clicked behind her with a soft finality. The room was quiet again. I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled. That night I slept for more than 6 hours straight. The next morning it happened again. Another knock. This one softer, uneven. Hesitant. When I opened the door, Sienna stood there with Sophie by her side. Sienna looked like she hadn't slept. Her face was pale, hair pulled back in a sloppy bun, mascara smudged. Sophie clutched a worn stuffed rabbit her coat half-zipped. Avery, Sienna began, her voice already cracking. Please. Just talk to me. I stepped back. Not much, but enough. They came in slowly. Sophie climbed onto the edge of the bed like she had done it 100 times before. We lost everything, Sienna said, sitting across from me. Mom's not herself. Eli's staying with a friend. Sophie's not eating much. She won't sleep unless your name is in the room. She looked down. Just help this one last time, she whispered. For the kids. I turned to Sophie. She was swinging her legs, staring at the carpet, thumb tucked in the collar of her coat. I knelt beside her and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. I love you, I said softly. Always. That never changes. Sophie leaned into me, resting her forehead against mine. I held her for a long moment, then let go. I stood up and looked at Sienna. I'm not helping because I'm guilted into it anymore, I said. I'm not giving out of fear or obligation. And I'm definitely not doing it because you think I owe you. She opened her mouth, but I kept going. You didn't just ask for help. You built your entire life around my silence. And then called me heartless when I stopped. Tears welled up in her eyes. I was drowning too, I said. But no one asked if I could swim. Sienna wiped her face. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. It didn't get bad. It always was. You just stopped pretending it wasn't. Sophie tugged gently on her mom's sleeve. Can we go now? Sienna nodded. As she walked toward the door, she paused. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't answer. The door closed. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. The motel heater clicked on with that familiar low groan as I sat at the small table by the window. Outside, the parking lot shimmered with ice and early morning sun, and for the first time in a long while I wasn't rushing to fix anything. By mid-morning, a courier dropped off a thick envelope from Cassandra. It was heavier than I expected. Inside were 2 folders and a note that said simply, "You're stronger than they counted on." The first folder contained the amended insurance policy. The original document with my name listed as sole beneficiary, clean and dated. Then 3 weeks before the fire, a new version. My name had been crossed out in shaky pen. Sienna's name scrawled over it, no legal filing, no notarization. Just ink over ink, as if I could be erased as easily on paper as I had been in their memories. The handwriting analysis confirmed what we already knew. It wasn't mine. It wasn't processed properly. And yet it had gone through. The second folder was a spreadsheet. Cassandra and her team had taken the document I gave them and cleaned it up for court. 10 years of financial support, color-coded, sourced, and chronologically detailed. There were over 100 entries. Tuition checks, grocery runs, cell phone payments, vet bills, birthday parties, orthodontics, insurance premiums, home repairs, holiday flights, medicine refills. Every favor I had ever said yes to. Every dollar totaled at the bottom. $176,418. I read through the entire thing without blinking. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. Cassandra filed both documents with the county court under a petition for asset misappropriation and financial fraud. The language was precise, legal. I didn't need to narrate what had happened. The numbers told the truth. We weren't asking for damages. Not even a settlement, just a record. A correction. An official statement that said I existed. 2 days later, Cassandra called. Well, she said dryly. That got their attention. I already knew it had. My voicemail had filled up overnight. Sienna and her husband had filed a countersuit. Abandonment. Emotional neglect. Willful disruption of minor dependence. An attempt to gain temporary guardianship of Sophie and Eli. Cassandra's tone was cool but firm. It's performative. There's no legal standing. But we'll file an official response. And I have an idea for that. Let me send something, I said. Just one thing. That night, I sat on the motel bed and opened my laptop. I didn't need to change anything. I just exported the spreadsheet Cassandra had formatted into a password-protected PDF. Every line included a date, a payee, a reason, and an attached receipt. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was accurate. We submitted it without a cover letter. 2 days passed, then 3. And nothing. Cassandra called again. Their attorney has gone quiet, no reply, no follow-up. That PDF must have said more than any statement ever could. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. I just nodded to myself and closed the laptop. The silence was enough. Until Harper found her voice. The voicemail came in at 5:47 a.m. I was still in bed staring at the ceiling trying to remember what it felt like to sleep past dawn without worry. Her voice broke before the second sentence. I can't believe what you've done. I gave you life, Avery. I gave you everything I had. I raised you right, didn't I? I taught you to care for your family. And now you're turning on us like we're strangers. Like we mean nothing to you. I didn't think you were capable of this kind of cruelty. Is this what I raised? A daughter who would put her family through court. Is that what you are now? I sat up and listened to the whole thing. There was no apology. No moment of reflection. Just disbelief that I had stepped outside the lines she'd drawn. I pressed delete. Not out of spite, not out of anger. It just didn't belong in me anymore. I got dressed, slowly made motel coffee, and opened the window a crack. The morning air was cold but still. My hands didn't shake like they used to. Later that day, Cassandra sent an update. Court had accepted our evidence. The insurance correction was being reviewed. The countersuit was flagged for potential dismissal. I told her thank you. Then I sat at the desk again, not to plan, not to fight. Just to breathe. It was the first time in over a decade that no one was asking me for anything. I wasn't the emergency fund. I wasn't the ride to practice. I wasn't the backup parent. I wasn't the villain or the ATM. I was just me. And somehow that was enough. The first night in my new apartment, I didn't unpack everything. I set my mattress on the floor, leaned a mirror against the wall, and used a cardboard box as a nightstand. No one was waiting for dinner. No one needed me to sign a field trip form or refill a prescription. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was mine. The space was small, just over 600 square feet, but everything inside belonged to me. A secondhand sofa from a donation center. A chipped desk I'd sanded down and painted pale blue. A tiny balcony that looked out over a quiet street lined with sugar maples. Renton wasn't glamorous, but it felt like a beginning I had chosen. On my second morning there, a white envelope slipped through the mail slot. No return address. My name written in blocky pencil. I opened it slowly, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a cup of black coffee in my hand. The letter was folded in half and smelled faintly of crayons. Hi, Aunt Avery, I miss you. I learned how to write my name first on homework because you said names are important. Sophie misses you too. She cried when the stuffed bunny got lost, so I let her borrow my dragon pillow. Mom is really tired. Grandma is always mad. But I'm okay. I hope your house has a bookshelf. Love, Eli. I stared at the last line for a long time. I hope your house has a bookshelf. It did. A small one pushed up against the kitchen wall with 6 paperbacks and a copy of my old community college finance textbook. I pinned Eli's letter to the fridge with a green apple magnet I found at a thrift store. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, logged into my laptop, and opened the Zoom link for my first official financial literacy workshop. The nonprofit Cassandra had connected me to ran classes for women rebuilding after hardship. Single moms. Divorcees. Widows. Most of them didn't have anyone left to ask for help. They reminded me of who I could have become if I had never drawn the line. 5 women joined the call. I introduced myself and explained how budgeting wasn't about sacrifice, it was about choice. You've already done the hard part, I told them. You survived, now we plan. One woman unmuted herself halfway through. Her name was Denise. She wore a scarf on her head and had dark circles under her eyes. This is the first time I haven't felt stupid about money, she said. I blinked back the sting behind my eyes and smiled. That's the last time you'll feel that way, I said. After the session ended, I sat with my coffee and stared out the window. There were no questions from the next room. No footsteps above me or downstairs. Just birdsong tires against pavement and the occasional bark from someone's golden retriever. By late afternoon, I went for a walk. Renton was quieter than anywhere I'd lived in years. I passed a local cafe with a chalkboard sign outside. Book club meets Thursdays. All welcome. I stepped in. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon and steamed milk. A woman behind the counter greeted me with a tired smile and asked if I wanted to join the club. I said not today, but maybe next week. She handed me a punch card anyway. Back at the apartment, I pulled out a notepad and wrote across the first page what I get to choose. Now I wrote slowly. Say no. Say yes because I want to. Buy flowers for myself. Leave the apartment without telling anyone. Come home to peace, not pressure. Eat pancakes for dinner. Throw out the old family calendar. Put my own name first. That night I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. I curled up on the couch with a fleece blanket and started reading one of the novels I had never finished. Halfway through a chapter, my phone buzzed with a voicemail alert. I didn't check it. The next morning, a small brown parcel was waiting by my door. No name, just my apartment number written in careful black pen. Inside was a wooden picture frame. The photo from the burned house. The one of me and Sophie, her arms around my neck, both of us mid-laugh. Someone had restored it. The edges were no longer scorched, the glass was clean. The paper was fresh. Tucked behind it was a folded slip of paper. You were never invisible. No signature, no explanation. I placed the frame beside Eli's letter on the kitchen shelf right beneath a hanging plant I hadn't yet managed to kill. That afternoon I went online and updated my resume. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I was ready to be seen again on my own terms. The walk started without intention. I had just finished a call with Cassandra about the final paperwork, slipped on my jacket, and let my feet lead. The afternoon sky hung heavy with the kind of gray that smelled faintly of rain, but I didn't mind. I had nowhere to be and no one expecting me. Somehow my steps curved toward the part of town I used to avoid. Toward that old wrought iron gate. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same manicured lawns, same mailbox with gold numbers. But the moment I turned onto the street where the old house used to stand, something inside me slowed. The house was gone, of course. What was left had been cleared. A for sale sign stood crooked in the dirt, its edges frayed from wind. Just beyond the lot, the gate that once led to our driveway stood shut, padlocked. I stood still on the sidewalk. The guard in the booth leaned out and squinted. Can I help you? I hesitated, hands in my coat pockets. No, I said. Just walking. He nodded without question, already turning back to his phone. I walked away. Not because I wasn't allowed in, but because I no longer needed to be. On the way home, I passed the little dancewear store where I once bought Sophie her first pair of ballet slippers. She had twirled in the mirror, hair tied up in a crooked bun, face beaming. I remembered adjusting the straps so they wouldn't leave red marks. I remembered sitting in the car afterward, letting her fall asleep on my shoulder even though my back ached from holding the same position too long. I stood in front of that window now and smiled. The slippers had been pink satin, the receipt had my name on it. The memory was mine. That evening I made a simple dinner, poured a cup of tea, and sat at my desk. I opened my laptop and found the file I had saved weeks ago. 10 years of receipts. Every dollar spent, every note. Eli's pediatrician visits. Sophie's asthma medication. The GoFundMe deposits. The therapy co-pays. Emergency car repairs. Mortgage payments listed under temporary assist. Grocery runs in months when Harper's budget was tight. That single $500 gift card for Sienna's Mother's Day getaway to Arizona. There were over 100 entries. No embellishment, no commentary. Just facts. At the very bottom I added one final line: you cannot erase someone you never truly welcomed. Then I opened my email. I started with the extended relatives. The ones who had borrowed, visited, praised my sacrifice at holidays, and then disappeared the moment I stopped footing the bill. Then the family friends who always smiled too brightly and called me the responsible one. The cousins who had tagged me in photos when they got their degrees, thanking me for covering just the first semester. Even the neighbor who once knocked on my door at 10 at night asking for gas money and never brought it up again. All of them. Each received the same message. No subject line, no intro. Just the spreadsheet attached and that one final sentence. I hovered over send for a long moment. Not out of fear, not out of rage. I just wanted to be sure I was doing it for the right reason. Then I clicked. There was no satisfaction in the sound of it being sent. Only silence. Soft. Complete. I shut the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the wind had picked up. The apartment windows rattled slightly, but the walls held. I didn't wait for responses. I didn't refresh the inbox. I didn't check to see if anyone opened the file. It wasn't about being heard, it was about being done. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and poured the rest of my tea down the sink. Then I opened the fridge, straightened Eli's letter, and pressed it flat beneath the magnet. A quiet knock came at the door around 9. Not urgent. Not angry, just 2 taps and a pause. I opened it slowly. It wasn't Harper, it wasn't Sienna. It was my upstairs neighbor Maya. We had only spoken twice. She held a Tupperware dish and a nervous smile. "I made too much chicken stew," she said. "Thought you might want some." I blinked, then smiled back. "That would be great." She handed it over. I thanked her and she turned to go but paused. "You seem like someone who needed something warm tonight." I nodded. Maybe I did. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of stew and watched the steam rise. It was spicy and rich and full of things I hadn't cooked for myself in years. And it tasted like something more than food. It tasted like permission. I didn't know if anyone would respond to the email. I didn't care. I had nothing left to prove. Only space now. And peace. The quiet didn't last long. The next morning, while folding towels fresh from the dryer, my phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then a relentless cascade. By the time I reached for it, the screen lit up with the tally. 39 missed calls. 12 voicemails. One group chat revived from the dead. Harper, Sienna, Joel, Jared. Even that distant cousin who once borrowed $500 and never returned a dime. I didn't answer. I didn't listen. The notifications kept pouring in. A voicemail from Harper, her voice tight and strained. "I can't believe you're doing this. To us. To your family." Another from Joel. "Your mother can't sleep. She's convinced you're trying to punish her." A text from Sienna. "You cut off Sophie's school payment. Are you serious?" I turned the phone to silent and placed its screen down on the table. The world could wait. That afternoon, I walked to the community cafe, a place I had come to think of as my exhale space. A bulletin board near the door caught my eye. They'd replaced the old flyers with a new poster. Calling mentors. Help women rebuild their lives with financial literacy. I stared at the words, then at the smiling face of a woman drawn on the poster. Her eyes looked like mine had once, tired, hopeful, unsure. Mel, the barista with the tattoo of a dandelion on her wrist, saw me looking and said, "You'd be perfect for that." I nodded. The next Tuesday, I showed up early wearing the navy blazer I'd saved for client meetings. Trina, the coordinator, recognized me from my previous workshop and gave me a clipboard with a warm smile. By 9:30, I stood in front of a small group of women seated in folding chairs. Single mothers. Older women starting over. A 22-year-old who had just gotten out of a halfway house. I cleared my throat, palms sweating, and began. 10 years ago, I believed that love looked like always saying yes. I thought that giving until it hurt meant I was strong. That being needed was the same as being valued. No one interrupted, no one looked away. So I kept going. But giving without boundaries doesn't build relationships. It builds debt, emotional, financial, spiritual. A woman in the back wiped her cheek with her sleeve. I taught them how to read a bank statement, how to separate survival spending from guilt spending, how to say no with a period instead of a paragraph. One of the women, Marisol, asked if it ever stopped hurting being cut out after you stop giving. Sometimes, I said, it hurts less when you realize you were never truly let in to begin with. After class, Trina asked if I'd like to teach weekly. I said yes without hesitation. On the way home, I stopped by a small bookstore and bought a journal. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of ginger tea and wrote at the top of the first page, "Things I owe myself time to rest. Money that stays mine. Kindness without condition. A life where my name is not an afterthought. A door I close without guilt. A voice I use for me." At 10:47 p.m. my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Sophie. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't even a question. It was a photo of the two of us years ago baking cookies in the kitchen. Flour on our noses, laughter in our eyes. Underneath it, 4 words in her handwriting: "I still remember you." My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I simply pressed my fingers to the screen for a moment, then locked the phone and turned it face down again. Not because I didn't care, but because I was choosing not to carry what didn't belong to me anymore. The next morning, I prepared my lesson plans and walked to the cafe to meet with Trina. On the chalkboard, someone had written in big pink letters, "Your worth is not defined by what you give away." I smiled. That afternoon, I stood in front of a new class. As I passed out handouts, one woman asked how to rebuild credit after years of shared debt. I told her the truth. You start by untying yourself from the people who never plan to pay you back. Then I said the sentence I had never allowed myself to speak out loud until now. No one owes you recognition, but you owe yourself respect. They wrote it down. And I knew in that moment I wasn't just teaching finance, I was teaching freedom. The wind picked up as I left the building. I didn't check my phone. I didn't flinch when it buzzed in my pocket again. This time I knew what it was. The past knocking. But I wasn't opening that door again. Not because I hated them. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I had finally learned to walk toward the life I chose, not the one I was assigned. And if you've ever found yourself erased by the very people you once held together, I hope you'll leave a comment below. I read every word. And you are not alone.